All right, so today I'm going to do a 10 by 10 inch alla prima oil painting of a lobster buoy. All right, so I'm going to be painting from a photograph that I took in Maine about 10 years ago. And I've wanted to paint from this image for a long time, but just felt, I just wasn't sure that it would work out. Anyway, today I'm going to give it a go, so let's get started. Okay, so I'm starting off by toning the panel with some burnt sienna, and I've just thinned it with odorless mineral spirits, scrubbed it on there, and then wiped it off with a paper towel, just so the panel would have a nice warm tint. Starting off by sketching the buoy here. The buoy's really the only drawing involved. The background water is mostly just kind of an abstract pattern. So I'm trying to get the buoy positioned correctly, positioning it high enough on the panel so I'll have some room in the foreground for the reflections. And I have not painted water like this very much, a few times maybe, and I didn't know what to do. I just started experimenting. I figured, all right, I'll just do the usual, work dark to light, look for a dark pattern. I'm not trying to reproduce the pattern of the water exactly, just kind of get the basic idea, because I want this to feel spontaneous. I want the brushwork to feel spontaneous. So I don't want to be too careful about trying to reproduce the ripples exactly. So now I'm coming in with the reflected sky color. That's phthalo blue with some white. And the darker portion was ultramarine with a little bit of burnt sienna. It really, when it was just the dark paint, I was doubting, but once I put in that light color, I was like, all right, it's starting to look like water. So I'm putting in some color on the buoy here, and then also starting in with the reflection. And I really like the saturated reds and yellows in the water and on the buoy. I usually don't get the saturation I'm after on the first pass. So I just kind of put it in, and then later in the painting process, I will put some thicker, more saturated paint on. I've simplified the buoy a little bit. There's some writing on the front of the buoy, like with a black marker. I've eliminated that. There's also a chunk out of the top of it where you can see the white foam underneath. I did not want that to compete with the reflections on the buoy down towards the water line. So I eliminated that as well, just simplified it. And now I'm putting in some additional reflected color in the water, maybe exaggerating it a bit, putting in a little bit more than I'm actually seeing in the photograph. And then the rest of the process was just trying to figure out how to make the water read correctly. It can be difficult when you have something like, the buoy is kind of carefully drawn in a way, and then it's on top of this abstract pattern, and yet you want the pattern to continue behind the buoy, and yet still have it feel spontaneous. So that was sort of the challenge. And then also just experimenting with softening some of the edges, because I wanted to maintain brushwork in the water, but I wanted it to have the feeling of water. So if the brushwork was too heavy, it could seem, you'd lose sort of that soft feeling of water. So it's sort of just going back and forth, a delicate balance. Actually the water was more forgiving than I thought, and I really enjoyed painting it. All right, so I worked on this painting for another half hour or so after the time lapse, and I just kind of cleaned things up, made sure that the handle on the buoy here was straight. It also had like a dark line right here, so I added that. I wanted to make sure that the waves behind the buoy kind of matched up, like this one was continuous, this one here kind of continuous as well. And then also, I wanted to make sure that the buoy looked like it was actually floating in the water. And so I darkened this area in here. There was a lot of, it was definitely dark underneath the buoy. So I looked for those and wanted to accentuate that dark area, and then punched up the color a little bit in these reflections as well. There was some nice stuff going on in here, just brushwork wise, that just happened the first time. I try to leave the first, if the first strokes work out, I try to leave them if possible. So I like the way this is sort of irregular. And these buoys are handmade anyway by the fishermen. And so they're kind of irregular and not very perfect. And so I wanted to make sure that the paint application on there kind of reflected that as well and not get too careful with it. As far as like painting reflections, I think that having an irregular pattern that kind of follows the shape of the waves or the ripples really is what gives you that feeling of a reflection. Also too, this yellow here has little bits of saturation that are as light as the actual buoy itself, but if you notice, the reflections are just a little bit darker than the object itself. So the yellows, this does have a little bit of yellow ochre in it, and I just put more red in the reflection of this sort of orange portion here. All right, so I hope you guys enjoyed this little demo. If you've been thinking about painting water and reflections in water, I'd say give it a go. Like I said, it's a lot more forgiving than I thought it was. So I'm glad that I tried, and I'm going to do another buoy actually probably later today. So I'd say give it a shot. Let me know what you guys think in the comments below if you have any questions, anything like that. As usual, a big shout out and thanks to my Patreon supporters. It is the Patreon support that keeps this channel going. If you'd like to pitch in, there is a link in the description. Got a bunch of videos, material lists, some other stuff on my Patreon page. So if you want to check that out, like I said, link down below. Other than that, have a great Memorial Day weekend. Stay creative, and I will see you guys in the next video.